What happens when a government department designed to represent America abroad starts collapsing from within? That question came into sharp focus when Senator Chris Van Hollen questioned a top State Department official over sweeping layoffs. The hearing revealed chaos, misinformation, and disregard for the people who help uphold U.S. foreign policy.
Secretary Rubio claimed that these big layoffs were, quote, a deliberate step to reorganize the State Department, while a senior official promised to carry them out in a manner that preserves the dignity of federal employees. In practice, the process has been badly botched, wasteful, and deeply disrespectful of the department's workforce. I heard the figures thrown around earlier about 76,000 State Department employees. You know very well, Mr. Deputy Secretary, over 50,000 of them are Foreign Service nationals who help do everything from maintain embassies and consulates to a lot of essential work. So that's a very misleading number. We have 14,000 plus Foreign Service officers, 12,000 civil servants, and of those civil servants, about 1,000 have been fired. These are employees with expertise in critical minerals, artificial intelligence, human rights, and consular affairs were let go, along with those that are fluent in languages like Chinese, Arabic, Russian, and Farsi, many of whom have received their training at taxpayer expense. Staff on parental leave were dismissed, including one person who had given birth just 12 hours earlier. The department used cheap procedural tricks to fire career officers with no regard for veteran status, performance, or tenure, directly contradicting Congress's intent. And at the same time, senior leadership failed to show up to thank these patriotic employees. One Trump-appointed Deputy Assistant Secretary took the day off as her team working on Afghan resettlement picked up pink slips. And while Secretary Rubio met with ASEAN counterparts in Malaysia, the team that had prepared his briefing materials in the Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs was being fired. Mr. Secretary, I hope you'll agree that you have a duty to tell the truth to Congress, do you?
Oh, certainly.
Okay. Well, you testified in the House yesterday, and you testified, and I'm quoting, "My understanding is we did not make any cuts in the Consular Affairs Bureau," unquote. But you did make cuts in the Consular Affairs Bureau, did you not?
So right after I said that statement, by the second part of that, the sentence immediately after that, I clarified and I said we did not cut anyone who was doing passport adjudications or customer service. The cuts in the Consular Affairs Bureau were to administrative functions, not to any of the customer service.
Well, my understanding, Mr. Secretary, there's going to be a lot of review of all this, is that you fired about 100 staffers, including teams that investigate passport and visa fraud. You also said in your House testimony that with respect to the office that prepared the Secretary for his trip overseas, none of the people who prepped him were terminated. That wasn't true, was it?
So the people what I said was the people in the country bureaus were not let go. They said the people who prepared him. So he was prepared by all the people who were in those country bureaus, and to the extent that the ASEAN Bureau, all these kind of regional offices were absorbed, or the functions were absorbed by the country-specific and regional offices.
With respect, I think that the message suggested that folks had been preparing the Secretary for that important trip, that none of them had been fired. But
if you care about how your government operates behind the scenes, this is a story you cannot ignore. Tap subscribe now so you don't miss the full breakdown.
Clearly does. But I got to go on, Mr. Secretary.
That's possible. There's a lot of people who can contribute to, and when a secretary travels, the entire organization steps in to support his travel. So is it possible that someone who contributed in some way to his trip was part of a reduction in force? Certainly that's possible.
You also said that the, quote, reorganization affected only the domestic footprint of the State Department. But in fact, some employees were fired after arriving at their overseas assignments. Isn't that true?
So to the extent people were riffed based on the assignment that they held as of May 29th, we were not able to some had onward assignments, but the nature of the RIF was that we had to pick a date for where people were as of May 29th. And within.
So the State Department Secretary said, nevertheless, we're going to send you and your families overseas, and their families had moved overseas, and they were RIF'd. Let me just turn to one last issue, because I've heard repeatedly the suggestion that all of these decisions were based on performance and that the best people were selected. Isn't it the case that in some offices you had a competition of one? Like one person competing against themselves?
So I'd be happy to go over the RIF registers with you.
I just would like an answer to my question. Isn't it the case?
There's no way for me to know when we're looking at 1,500 offices if there was. Is it likely that there was probably one office that had one or two people and another one that had 50 or 150 people? It's a big organization. Some offices.
Yeah, it's a big organization, and so when you fire 1,300 people, it's understandable that we didn't go through a deliberate process. I don't buy that, Mr. Deputy Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The department claimed the process would preserve the dignity of federal workers. In practice, it had the opposite effect. Entire teams were let go with no recognition for their work, no warning, and no support from leadership. These are not just internal HR issues. These are the faces behind American diplomacy being dismissed with no regard. And the consequences are global. Make sure to subscribe if you believe these stories deserve to be heard. Then came the contradictions. Van Hollen pressed the Deputy Secretary on several misleading statements. For example, he claimed there were no cuts in the Consular Affairs Bureau. But records showed around 100 employees were dismissed from that very division, including those investigating visa and passport fraud. He also stated that no one who prepared the Secretary of State for an overseas trip was fired. But evidence proved otherwise. Staff from the East Asian Affairs Office, who had contributed directly to that trip, were among those terminated. Van Hollen kept the pressure on. He called out each inconsistency, exposing a pattern of either carelessness or a deliberate attempt to obscure the facts. If you want to hear more truth being demanded on the Senate floor, click subscribe and stay with us. There was also the issue of fairness. Van Hollen pointed out a troubling detail in the selection process. In some cases, there was no real competition. Employees were let go after being the only person considered in their office. No review. No peer comparison. Just one name on a list and a decision made. The Deputy Secretary didn't deny it. With more than 1,000 offices affected, it was likely that some were reduced with no serious deliberation. Van Hollen called it what it was, a rushed and chaotic move that hurt both the agency and the people in it. When accountability fails, public trust collapses. That's why it's critical to keep asking questions. If you agree, subscribe now for more honest coverage. This wasn't just a normal Senate exchange. It was a clear warning that when leadership acts without responsibility, real people pay the price. Whether it's experts in national security or translators trained on public dollars, the way these layoffs were handled shows a troubling disregard for the mission of the State Department. Van Hollen's questioning made one thing very clear: transparency, fairness, and truth are still worth fighting for. Subscribe now if you want more content that puts the facts in front of politics. We'll be following this story closely. Thanks for watching, and stay informed.